This week on the BackTable podcast.
It's a great time to be an innovator. And in medicine, I think our culture has finally accepted it's okay to be a doctor and to pursue active entrepreneurial ambitions. There's nothing wrong with that. And if anything, you're contributing, I think, materially to the benefit of patients that you would never even have remote exposure to if your idea actually works.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the BackTable Innovation Podcast. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and on backtable.com. This is our next installment in the BackTable Innovation Show, where you will hear stories from physician entrepreneurs who are helping to drive healthcare forward through medtech innovation. Today, we've got another great episode with the inventor of the Saranas Early Bird monitoring system with EP cardiologist, Dr. Mehdi Razavi. Welcome to the show, Mehdi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Aaron.
Is that okay if I call you EP cardiologist?
Absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Well, Mehdi, I myself being an interventional cardiologist, and we do have a fair number of interventional cardiologists on the show. We've had Gary Ansel on the show, another founder of a med tech company and physician entrepreneur. This show, we like to bring on physician entrepreneurs who can help tell their stories, which are oftentimes inspiring, but also help docs kind of overcome any challenges that they might have with their own ideas. And so feel free to tell us about it, the origin story, but also we just want to kind of hear, like, going from idea to execution, what that process was like. But first, tell us a little bit about your background and where you were in your career when the original idea came up.
I was finishing up my training at Mayo Clinic, and I was coming in Houston. I had just started in Houston, and my practice was starting to get busier. And at that point, we were still doing, you may remember, that was back in the days of giving Lovenox to everyone peri-procedurally and trying to, transition them with Lovenox and things of that nature. And so a lot of these patients, we would have to give them, because peri-procedurally with left atrial ablations, the risk of stroke is really, really high. So we would aggressively anticoagulate them, ACTs of above 300 routinely. And the incidence of hematomas was relatively high. Lovenox was a bad player, even when you did the adjusted dosage. And so what happened is I had a case where post-procedurally, about an hour later, they call me. The patient's, having pain. They're hypotensive. And unfortunately, in reality of medicine these days, I'm in a car driving between hospitals at that point. And it just, you get that feeling in your chest and you're like, oh boy, is there a way that I wish I could figure out right now if there's a bleed? And I remember at that moment, it came to me that if that sheath could tell me what the impedance is, I bet you I could tell you if blood is in that space or if it's not blood or if it's some other reason. And that way I could be able to potentially detect and alert myself in terms of, hematoma forming. So that's kind of how it started as I was driving between hospitals.
Oh gosh, I just cringe, because I know that feeling, and especially that call where you're about to go and literally be scrubbed in on another procedure, and you got to make that decision. What do? Do I go back to check on this patient and then have to postpone or cancel my next procedure? And it's a really tricky position to be in. But it sounds like it was, in that pain point you're experiencing that. It sounds like a light bulb went off in terms of, thinking about the impedance. Do you have an engineering background? Is that why that sort of came to you?
No, actually, I don't. I was a bio major and, philosophy minor, but I think the EP background did help me a little bit here. In EP, we really, really use impedances quite frequently, and we have a pretty good understanding of what kind of environments, microenvironments, and even kind of global in terms of what regions of the body do what kind of impedances. And so we knew that, one of the features that we look at, we can tell that we're in the middle of the cavity when our catheter impedance suddenly drops, because obviously you're conducting a lot better in blood than when you're contacting tissue. And so that was probably the thing that I think kind of potentially helped me out. I wonder if I was an interventional cardiologist, if I would have come up with the idea. And that's why I actually think that I do EP, and I'm actually directly not involved in some of these high-risk procedures that you guys do, but I came up with the idea. I think the EP background definitely helped.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it does help a lot. Now there's multiple specialties involved in endovascular care and the impact that this can have. I mean, a groin hematoma is the worst. Even if it's small, it's just such a nuisance. It goes from nuisance to life-threatening, right? And so can you tell us next steps? Like, okay, you have this idea, it came from, having to deal with a complication. Where did you take that idea from there?
So I was fortunate enough that across the street we have a really, really great engineering program in Rice University. And so I turned this idea into one of these capstone projects, which I encourage all of my colleagues to consider. These are projects that you get to work with either, college seniors or graduate students in college, and you support a research project, you act as a mentor, and sometimes the ideas bear fruit and sometimes they don't. So this was one of the first ideas I had. I went and I pitched it at one of these for the undergrads, and it was actually not even a graduate program. It was the senior capstone program. And then a team formed, and we tried to have a working prototype. I wouldn't say it was working, but by the end of the year, it was good enough that we actually we created the startup right around that period of time. And at that time, it was just a project between me and an undergrad in college. That's how it started.
That's incredible. God, how satisfying for that senior. It was a senior undergrad?
Yes. Unbelievable.
I mean, unbelievable to go to now a full-fledged med tech company. Had you done any sort of device design or entrepreneurial stuff before this?
Yeah, I did do a project, and it was with one of the other companies. So I did a project with Medtronic, and that was the first time that I really came up with an idea, and then we implemented it. And the idea with regards to that was a means of optimizing cardiac resynchronization therapy, CRT, device timing. So basically, we used intra-atrial conduction delays to program and optimize the settings on the device for biventricular pacemaker. And actually, Medtronic patented this, and they are using it in one of their algorithms. So that was the first time that I saw an idea actually, and that was right at my transition between fellowship and starting my job. And it's really weird because until I was done as a fellow, I really did not have any large or huge, contributions, I would say, in terms of innovation or original research or anything like that. I was hardcore clinician, wanted to do clinical medicine, but then, I don't know, the switch happened. I found it very, very just invigorating, and it just offered a whole level of spice and excitement to my day-to-day work. And once you get that first endorphin surge, that first idea that works and you see it, you just need more.
You're totally right, man. It's addictive. I mean, I was kind of in the same boat where I didn't really contribute much in terms of research or invented a device or even medical education until we started BackTable about 6 years ago. And, once you get that traction where somebody's like, oh, this is helpful. Like, this is a real contribution to your specialty. It is addictive. It is great. And it's great to have, you want to do more. You're right. You want to keep it going. You want to keep that feeling going. And so and that's part of the reason why we started this entrepreneurial innovation podcast, is to tell those same stories, because it is a common thread. So it sounds like you'd already gone through a patent process. How involved were you in that patent process?
I was not very much. Kind of Medtronic really took the lead on that, and I'm grateful for that, because I think at that point, if I had seen how the sausage is made in terms of patent searches and this and that, I probably would have taken a couple of steps back. But I didn't, and so I went into my next project, which was Saranas, which was this idea, and that's when I really learned, okay, this is how you do it. You go to the USPTO website, you try to figure out how to navigate, the maze of all the prior IP. You search, and then someone brings up, oh, have you seen this last patent? And you look at it, and you're like, every time you're searching a patent, you're praying that idea has not been, your idea is not really replicating someone else's. But yeah, it was a slog, but it was really, really fruitful. At the end, when you do get a patent from it, it's an unbelievable feeling. And it was really, really worth it. I think as physicians, we want to impact our patients. And obviously the most concrete way of doing it is when you do a procedure, when you open a occluded LAD or something like that. That's very, very concrete. That's, you're making an impact on that one patient. But I really encourage entrepreneurship and innovation, because then you really are impacting so many more individuals. Yes, you don't have that one-on-one contact. Yes, it doesn't feel, it perhaps not as gratifying as when they, bring you a gift and the follow-up visit. But to me, it feels just as impactful. And I like you say, once you have an idea like this and you take it to fruition, you wanna do more.
Well said. And it sounds like the patent process. So how long did that patent process take?
From the initial submission of our provisional to when we got our final office action for the first patent was probably, and you won't believe this, or you might, but probably on the order of about 5 to 6 years. It really was a very long. Yeah, it really took a long time. Yep.
That's incredible. Yeah. And like you had the patient, as long as there's nothing else like it still out there and you have the patience and you're pushing this forward, what kept you pushing forward through that whole process during that time, 5, 6 years?
Once I saw that this works, it was to me done. I was like, this idea works. And when you see that it works and you see the impedances drift as you're, injecting, you're doing your studies, your preclinical studies and things of that nature, when you know the idea works, I don't know, I was like, I'm determined to make this concept clinically germane, clinically relevant. And that probably was the single motivating factor that pushed me on this.
So during that time, while you're waiting on the patent, you have a working prototype, you're doing the animal studies, you're collecting the data to show that it works. Okay. And that was all via at Baylor?
Yeah, that was at Texas Heart Institute. Yep. So this was at Texas Heart Institute. Of course, my affiliation is also with Baylor. So both of these institutes work together, and you need to have buy-in, honestly, from your tech transfer office. I can't overemphasize the importance of having a friend up in the tech transfer office. It really, really helps things out, and it smoothens the process. These 3 institutions work together so that basically all I was doing is focusing on the technology itself. It's really, really important to have buy-in from your institution.
Yeah. So we've had docs on the show before to talk about the partnership with when you're in an academic institution, how to navigate those things. It sounds like most people we have on the show get really good support. Although we've had docs, believe it or not, like we had Julio Palmas on this show, and he was talking about his support wasn't that great in the beginning and where he was. And so it can be touch and go, but it seems like nowadays most institutions seeing the potential are, put that extra effort in. But then you got to figure out, okay, how do you create a company out of this, right?
That's exactly right. And I created the company actually pretty early in the process. That was one thing that I was excited about too. I was like, I want to start a company. Let's see how this goes. And I did that process. And I would advise that you do that early, because if anything, the company gives you structure. You're forced into having structure. You're forced into tasks, and you're forced into deciding who's going to do what. And that's my other big advice to my fellow cardiologists. Most of us are physicians. We're not engineers. We're not business people. And as smart as many of us are, and as confident as many of us are about our intelligence, I would definitely say that one of the important things has been realizing the limitations that you have. And so having a startup has really helped with me, at least the way my thought process is. I always like to know, okay, who's doing what are the roles towards the goal? And the startup really just helped with that. So I started the company very early in the process.
And you were telling me this, how you guys chose the name Saranas from the Canary in the Coal Mine, but tell that story, how you just decided on a name, because naming is challenging as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. Me and Alex Arevalos, the co-founder, were sitting. I still remember in Barnes and Nobles back when Barnes and Nobles were more of a thing. Unfortunately, topic for another day. And we were thinking about ideas. And the canary, the yellow canary, it's Serenus something. I forget what the species is, but the genus was Serenus. And so I said, okay, if we are a warning system. We are the early bird. So let's name ourselves something that, dovetails with that. So I said, okay, let's just make it easy. All A's instead of different vowels. So Saranas, and that's the name of the company.
Yeah. Makes it easy to spell too.
Yeah, yeah.
That's cool. I like that. I was telling Mehdi before that I'm a zoology major in undergrad. So I like that touch. But so you started a company, and so in those early days, like, how did you determine? I mean, you knew that there was a problem here to solve, right? It's groin hematomas. There needs to be a system to detect whether or not there's going, especially in the setting of large bore procedures, people need anticoagulation. There needs to be a way to detect if there's a hematoma forming. Did you do any research around product market fit? Did you interview a bunch of docs? Did you dive into the literature? How did you kind of determine that before you invested in starting a company around it?
No, I definitely was talking. At that point, TAVRs were just beginning. They were just in their infancy. And, our center has, and the folks around us, very, very active with TAVRs. So we had quite a high volume, relatively speaking, back in those days when the procedures were quite a bit more, longer and more involved. So we had a good idea that this is a problem. We also were one of the first centers where we were using the tandem heart and eventually the Impellas. So we had an idea that large bore procedures can be associated with with a frankly unacceptable level of bleeding often at the access site. And so gut-wise, I knew it was a problem. In the beginning, in the early days, it was mostly informally talking to my colleagues, and that's all it was. I would tell them that I had this situation. I have an idea. Do they think that I'm crazy? Do they need this information? And technicalities aside, it was clearly most of the docs definitely were strongly in favor of it. But of course, they're your friends, they're your colleagues, so you always have to be, you have to be cautious in terms of the opinions that you get in those earlier stages. But that's what I based my certainty on, was the fact that my colleagues were telling me, yeah, this is a real problem.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's true. Like sometimes you get the people who are just going to be nice, like, oh yeah, that sounds great. But you want that real honest person who's just bluntly like, that's not it. But even when somebody says that's not a great idea, or they shoot you down, you still have to take that with a grain of salt, and you still have to, I think the key thing, and you kind of mentioned this, is just talk to as many people as you can about it, and don't just stick to a few people, because that could make you biased either way, right? If you only talk to a few people and 2 out of 3 are saying it's a horrible idea, then you might walk away with your head down and never pursue it. But then, you talk to 3 people and they're all like, oh yeah, that's amazing, but they're not giving you honest feedback, then you might pursue something that's not like really worth the time or effort,
There is an element of risk one way or another, be it intellectual, be it time, be it financial, that you're undertaking. And I think, as physicians, many of us are perhaps a little bit more risk averse. And I always say my backside got a lot of calluses, and it's very, 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 very tough. You need to have a resilient backside. You need to accept the failures, and there were many, many failures, in order to have the success. You have to be stubborn.
Yeah, you got to fail forward, is what they say, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, I do want to talk about some of those failures and challenges, but first, before we do that, can you walk us through actually how the device works?
Mm-hmm, certainly. The device essentially is our standard sheath, vascular access sheath that we all have. On the outer surface of it, there's 4 ring electrodes. And those ring electrodes, once you place the device in, it's connected to its own dongle on the flush port. And that unit has its own internal, the whole sheath is self-working system. Once you activate it, you insert the sheath, you press the button on that flush port, we call it the dongle. it turns on the device and everything else is with the device. It starts emitting an electrical signal continuously during the course of the procedure. It's sub-physiologic, so it's not stimulating tissue. It's not capturing muscle, doing anything like that. And you're continuously then monitoring the impedance, the electrical resistance of that area. Now, it turns out that of all the tissues in our body, blood has the lowest level of resistance to electrical conduction. The resistance, for example, if I touch my ablation catheter to the tip or the body of the left atrial wall, my impedance will suddenly go up. The same thing happens if I go inside the veins, pulmonary veins, because now you're closer, you're proximate to the lung tissue, which has the highest resistance, of course, of all. And so as this baseline resistance is being defined for every individual patient, it's also looking at deviations from that resistance. And as it turns out, as fresh blood is inserted into any kind of a space, biological space, that resistance starts dropping because you have fresh blood exposure. And not only does it indicate that there is an introduction, a drop in impedance, there's an introduction of blood, it actually correlates well. The extent of drop in impedance actually correlates quite well with the volume of blood. And so you can start by tracking the impedance, and as you're tracking the impedance and the drop in impedance, you then have your own formula to correlate that with the volume of blood. And so the device will tell you, okay, we have a drop in impedance. And then it will take you through 3 stages of impedance drops, correlating with different levels of bleeding and volumes of bleeding. And most of the times we tell the docs, certainly on the first light, if it goes off, don't do anything, just keep it in mind. But then as the second light goes off, I'm still, I think it's prudent to be on alert, but not to panic. I wouldn't alter the course of the case. But once the third light comes, then you really may want to consider if there's a drop in blood pressure, or you may want to adjust your ACT or your heparin boluses or anticoagulation of choice. And the beauty of it is that, we keep it post-procedure. So you can leave the sheath in, and typically the way we work it is it becomes the venous sheath. We don't use it as the arterial sheath. We put a venous sheath. If you have a temp wire, you use the same venous sheath. It's a fully functional sheath. And then if the impedance is stable, it is incredibly sensitive. If the impedance levels are not deviating, you are virtually assured that there is no bleeding. So if you do have hypotension and the device doesn't trigger, you're fairly confident to look for other reasons. And if the device is triggered, then you know that there's potentially a real problem.
Got it. And so because the sheath sits in the venous, in like the common femoral vein, adjacent to the artery,
That's right. That
Okay.
is exactly right. Correct.
And when somebody, because I'm always thinking about, because it's rare that, IRs might help get access for like a large bore procedure sometimes, but in terms of large bore arterial procedures, we don't do many unless, maybe some people are helping out with aortic stent grafts and whatnot, but I'm just thinking about post-procedure, having it in there, especially if somebody's anticoagulated, especially if they have a huge groin, right, where you can't really monitor them visibly very well, and they're pretty sedated, or maybe it was an anesthesia procedure where they can't really tell you if they're having any pain. Those kinds of cases where I most often am seeing like actual groin hematomas, and then a failed closure device. Is it affected at all by placement of a closure device?
No, the closure device would be placed. No, it is not. It's really interrogating the deep tissues. Yeah, that's right. And it's actually the impedance area. The sheath is 2 or 3 centimeters longer than our typical sheath, short sheath that we're used to. And the reason is we want to interrogate the deeper tissues. We're not really interested in an anterior, hematoma. That is, we're interested in picking out what causes the retroperitoneal. That's correct.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Always a problem with those larger patients where, again, you don't even get the warning signs of a retroperitoneal bleed until it's too late, right? Their blood pressure is already dropped, and then it's a real emergency. So, who used it in the first patients? Did you get to use it in the first patients, or where were you trialing that at?
So we have been using it. Probably, Mike McKinnon, the CEO, now has a much better handle on things. But I would say we're probably somewhere close to over 100 hospitals, I would think. But again, don't quote me on this. And it's being used. I myself have not used it, and I'll explain in a couple of seconds why. 2 reasons. First of all, I'm cautious of sometimes the optics of things, and I just feel that right now the procedures that I do are mostly venous, right, with AFibs and what we do clinically. But my colleagues have been using it, and my EP colleagues have definitely used it. And the first place that we actually tried it, we did do it as our interventional cardiologist at St. Luke's did it along with Philippe Genero. The first one that was done was our current CMO, Philippe Genero, and he did it in New Jersey. So yeah, the key is to have a damn good CMO, and we really have an awesome CMO. He has been incredible. So yeah, I'm very lucky that way.
Yeah. So how did you build out that team? Because you say you started the business, but what were your first hires, and then how did it kind of unfold from there?
Yeah, our first hire was the CEO, and it was touch and go. It was everyone's first time doing this, and you'll learn that the less experience you have in the beginning, the more experienced folks may be a little bit gun shy of working with you. You kind of have to establish at times your bona fides, both in terms of getting the best talent to work with you, I think, and also raising funds, which is very, very critical. So I started a team with the CEO. The CEO, we all were working with basically sweat equity. And it was hard, but after about 1.5 years, we had our first series of, angel investors, and then we did a Series A. And after that, we transitioned CEOs. I've learned that that's kind of a normal process as these startups evolve. You have the CEOs who's come in at the earliest stages, and then you have certain skill sets required at that period. And then as the process matures, everyone has the understanding now you need a second set of skill sets. And so the team built from that nucleus of the CEO, the tech, and also legal. Believe it or not, that's one of the first things that you need to figure out, who is doing your legal work, legal and regulatory. And once we had that, we started working towards FDA, and we created a board, mostly with myself, the co-founder, investors, and we had, a couple of observers on the board, and it just grew from there. Once we got the FDA clearance, that really was a inflection point. Then the quality of hiring was easier, raising money was a lot easier, and at that point, then we transitioned CEOs again, and now we have Mike McKinnon. So, yeah.
Okay, so Mike is your third CEO along the roadmap?
That's right.
Got it. And was it difficult to get FDA approved?
It was not. We did the entire thing was done with a 510K de novo. It was done all with preclinical animal work. We did not have to do any clinical work with that. Correct.
Yeah, that's amazing. Probably because it's not a treatment, right? It's a detection device. Correct. I would imagine that'd be easier.
It's a class 2 device.
Got it.
In other words, if it stops working, you still have a totally functional sheath. If everything else about it completely fails.
Yeah, I guess it would just be like if there was missignaling or something like that. I mean, is that a problem? Like, did you ever have that kind of glitch with missignaling?
Not clinically. The biggest concern I had was that the impedance monitoring the electrical output can potentially stimulate the femoral nerve or the femoral vein or something of that nature. That was my biggest concern. And so we had to down titrate the energy. But right now the energies that we use are an order of magnitude lower than even the lowest, most sensitive pacing thresholds or capture thresholds that you have.
Okay. Any other challenges along the way, like any big setbacks that you think of, like that make you laugh now that they're over?
Yeah. There, you have your setbacks. I think one of the things that there was a time that early on, as we were raising funds, that honestly it was not easy. It was definitely difficult when everyone was new, and I did think, is this ever going to happen? But you just persist, and it does. If you persist, it's going to happen. I really believe that.
Was there any individual or mentor or somebody who was a significant advocate or supporter along the way?
I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Jack Gill. Jack Gill is a legend in the medical innovation entrepreneurial space. He's now retired from day-to-day activity and investment, but early on he was the first one who bought the idea, who supported it, and he has a relatively extensive network here in Houston, and he really made a lot of introductions for us, taught me how to do this, gave me all that the advice that you need to be able to make your bona fides. And I will never be able to thank him enough for all the support that he showed me. Yeah, Jack Gill is the man.
Well, that sounds like a great guest for this show too.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's got some stories to tell. You're heavily involved as a founder and but you're also a busy, probably still full-time clinical EP doc, right?
That's right.
You're still full-time?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do you balance that? How do you balance it's not even a side gig anymore. I mean, it's a full-fledged med tech company. How do you balance working on that with your full-time clinical work?
My day-to-day with the company on the business side is not as active. And I simply, that's not something that has been something that I'm either really that, I don't want to say interested, but it's something that's not my sweet spot, if you will. And so I have not been as, day-to-day involvement is more limited. You're exactly right. You have to pick your battles. Your bandwidth is limited, and there's only so much that you can do. And I'll just, on a personal note, I'm like an older father, so the family, a new kid comes, and just all these different things are happening. You learn that you have to manage your time. So I'm just grateful that we have an incredible CEO who's running this show fantastically and is allowing me to have the breathing room to do my clinical work and still spend time with the family and do all those things. So it's really important to find a team. And also, I find it really critical to understand that there are certain things that we are just, other people know stuff about other things more than we do. And again, this is coming back to what I said earlier in the show. I think as physicians, our personalities don't lend themselves to giving up control or giving up the sense that, I know what's going on here. I'm potentially the smartest person, one of the smarter people in the room. And we have to understand that sometimes you just have to back off and respect the fact that you don't know what you don't know.
Good advice, solid advice. I think that's the problem with, we trip over our own egos, right? I mean, we went through all this training, we have a clinical experience. We're used to being the smartest person in the room, and or we think we are, in our procedure rooms, and then we're used to giving orders and whatnot, and it's hard to listen sometimes when you're in that in the room with the business types, because they have the experience there, right? And it's okay to give your opinion, but I think where I see it go wrong with physicians and startups is we just can't get past our own ego where we got to be the final say. And sometimes you just kind of let people who know what they're doing. And you're right. The other piece of it is we are risk averse, and so we're afraid of failure. And so that gets in our way as well. Right. So, well, all good stuff. And, any more innovations in the pipeline, Mehdi, and for Saranas?
There's been thought about putting this system on a wire. There's been thought about which that way, instead of having the sheath, you can just retain a wire. That way, potentially, you could leave the monitoring for a longer period of time. So those kinds of technical innovations, right? We're also in the midst of a clinical trial to demonstrate the efficacy of the procedure. We're collecting data. There are centers that have documented drops and their incidence of their bleeds. And we're trying to get that word out. So it's very, very exciting times for us, and it's a great time to be an innovator. And I'll say one other thing: in medicine, I think our culture has finally accepted it's okay to be a doctor and to pursue active entrepreneurial ambitions. There's nothing wrong with that. And if anything, you're contributing, I think, materially to the benefit of patients that you would never even have remote exposure to if your idea actually works. So that's just an additional thought that I would like to put out there.
No, I totally agree. I think that's solid advice to finish up with because, I mean, look at you. You took a problem that that's very common in medicine with groin hematomas, and you found a solution for it, and it's going to have positive impact on so many patients and physicians, right? The amount of stress that we deal with groin hematomas.
And nursing staff. Let's not forget.
And nursing staff. Oh,
they love the system. They love the system. Yeah.
Well, and techs too. I mean, they're the ones that have to, hold the pressure when after a procedure, and to be able to have this device that helps determine whether or not there's a problem. I think the whole team is going to be happy. So, well, thank you so much, Mehdi, for coming on the show and telling us the origin story of Saranas. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, whether it be for an innovation question or about the device itself, what's the best way to reach you on LinkedIn or?
LinkedIn is absolutely the best way. It's Mehdi Razavi, cardiologist in Houston, Texas. And please, I have a very active LinkedIn page and would entertain any questions or any ideas, thoughts for collaboration. If there's centers that want to talk about this technology, happy to engage with them.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mehdi.
Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars, and share with a friend. If you have any questions or comments, DM us at BackTable Innovation on Instagram, LinkedIn, or Twitter. BackTable Innovation is produced and hosted by Brian Hartley,
Aaron Fritts,
Diana Velasquez-Pimentel,
and Eric Amaker.
Our audio team is led by Kieran Gannon, with support from
Josh McWhirter,
Aaron Bowles, Nick Shellcross,
and Ness Smith-Savadoff. Design and digital marketing led by Brian Schmitz.
Social media and PR by Ann Dang.
Administrative support provided by Jim Willie Kennebrew.
Thanks again for listening.
See you again next week.